Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 74 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lions. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can give me a follow on Twitter at halfandhalf_TPL. I am flying solo today for the Week 4 NFL review, but there's a lot of games to get into, and so let's go ahead and dive into them. We're going to start, as we always do, with the Eagles game, which was a victory on Sunday in terrible conditions against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Eagles win the game 29-21. They were in a situation that they hadn't really been in so far this year, and that was trailing early. The Jaguars came out and they scored to go up 7-0. Then Jalen Hurts throws a pick six on a terrible read, the worst decision he's made so far this year. And the Eagles found themselves down 14-0 against their former coach in front of their hometown fans in the middle of, a horrific weather game. The Eagles haven't really been punched in the mouth like they were on Sunday yet this season. They've somewhat been able to coast in games. They had, week one, obviously the Lions had the long drive, but the Eagles were up big at halftime and they tailed off in the second quarter. They were up big on the Vikings at halftime. They were up big. They've been up big every week, and they've sort of stalled out in the second half. Well, this time the Eagles had to play from behind, and you saw resiliency in the team as they didn't panic. Jalen Hurts took command of the game. He played well. The Eagles were able to run the ball on a day when throwing just simply wasn't working very well due to the wet and the wet weather and the wind. And you saw the team rally. That's an encouraging sign. If you're an Eagles fan looking at this game, the question had been what's going to happen when the Eagles get punched in the mouth, and they got their mouth bloodied in the first quarter. And they rallied. They scored 20 unanswered points in the second quarter, 29 unanswered points in the game, and they hang on for a 21-29 victory. Now, did they catch some breaks? They absolutely caught some breaks. Trevor Lawrence fumbled the ball 4 times, and a couple of them were strip sacks. One of them, he just dropped it. It was wet weather. There were 5 total fumbles, or 5 total turnovers for Trevor Lawrence. 1 interception on a great play by James Bradberry, and the 4 fumbles. And so the Eagles were banged up. They were dealing with some injuries. They came into the game without Avonte Maddox. They lost Darius Slay on like the 3rd or 4th play of the game. And so they were down 2 corners. They chose to put Josiah Scott in the slot, and they had Zach McPherson on the outside. And they benefited from the weather and the pass rush because there were some blown coverages. There were a couple blown coverages that the pass rush covered up by getting to Trevor Lawrence and either moving him off of his spot or getting a sack. There were also some coverage busts that Lawrence just didn't hit, and he probably hits those in better weather. And so this was an example of your pass rush and the weather a little bit bailing out some shoddy coverage. And you would expect a little bit of shoddy coverage rolling out your CB 4 and 5 in a game. The thing is that I thought they were both okay. I thought Scott and McPherson were both okay in man coverage. They really struggled in zone coverage, especially when it comes to the Eagles passing off routes and pattern matching. That's where you saw a lot of those busts. And to be honest, some of that went on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson too. I think Chauncey Gardner-Johnson has really struggled in his transition to safety. And that was sort of on display this game. Marcus Epps has definitely been the better safety for the Eagles so far, but they're able to overcome those busts in large part, again, because of the pass rush. The pass rush had a fantastic day. Hassan Reddick had 2 sacks. He had 2 fumbles forced, 2 fumbles recovered, a tackle for loss, and he is the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. Jordan Davis was flying around the ball. He had some really cool clips that I've cut up. I'm going to put on Twitter later, blowing up the center, chasing down plays from backside pursuit. The Brandon Graham looked good in limited reps. Fletcher Cox looked good in limited reps. And you just see the pass rush rotation the Eagles have and the way that it is able to impact games. Huge shout out to James Bradberry, who had a game-saving interception potentially. The Eagles dialed up some sort of strange pressure. I'm not sure that they got that call right, because what ended up was 3 Jaguars on one side of the field with only James Bradberry in coverage, and Bradberry was able to read the eyes of Trevor Lawrence and make the play. So the Eagles defense coming alive in this game. It's a day to forget for Trevor Lawrence, who certainly didn't have his best game. Jalen Hurts, after the early interception, played really well. He ends up 16 of 25 for 204 yards and 1 interception while taking 2 sacks. His stats don't look great. His QBR is low. It doesn't matter. He had a really good game after that initial interception. He ends with 16 carries for 38 yards rushing, which again doesn't look good, but his legs is what made this offensive rushing attack go. The Eagles playing down 2 offensive linemen, constantly facing heavy boxes, and he was able to constantly draw attention from Jaguars linebackers and defensive ends. Josh Allen was so sick of Jalen Hurts by the end of this game. And I just put another clip montage up on YouTube showing how they were using Hurts to negate those heavy boxes. So be sure you go check that out. But he largely clears the way, along with the offensive line, of course, for Miles Sanders to rip off a career high 134 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns on 27 carries. So Miles Sanders had a great game. A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert had really good games, each pull in 5 receptions, 95 yards for Brown, 72 for Goedert. And of course, they did both have a big drop. Dallas Goedert drops what would have been a first down, maybe a touchdown down in the red zone that forced the Eagles to settle for a field goal. And then A.J. Brown on a 4th and 3 decision to go for it with up 8 near the end of the game, inside the 2-minute warning. The Eagles decided to go for it on 4th and 3 instead of attempting a short field goal. And I saw some people that didn't like that decision from Nick Sirianni. To be honest, I liked the call. This was the side of the field that Jake Elliott missed the extra point on earlier. You saw in the third quarter at the end, Sirianni took a timeout so they could kick a field goal going the other direction. So the wind certainly played a factor. Elliott had been banged up during the game. He's missed a kick from basically that distance. So I didn't mind the idea of going for it there. If you get the first down, you ice the game. If you kick the field goal, you're giving the ball back. And then there's the potential. And it's a long shot, but we've seen it happen this year. The Jets did it to the Browns, where you can score and get an onside kick and score again. So I saw people didn't like that decision. I liked the decision. Didn't mind it at all. I thought, the play worked. You called an isolation slant to your best receiver and A.J. Brown, and Hurts put it on him. The route was worked. The ball placement was good, and it just goes through his hands. I think Brown makes that catch in better circumstances, and he'll tell you he should have made it then. The same for Dallas Goedert on his. Both of those would normally be caught. Obviously, it wasn't the best conditions. Devonta Smith has a quieter game, only 3 receptions for 17 yards, but that's just how it goes in this offense with so many mouths to feed. You're going to pick your matchups from game to game. And this particular game, A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert were the matchups of choice. Now, the Jaguars came into this game allowing only 55 rushing yards per game. They had only allowed 165 yards rushing on the year. The Eagles rushed for 210 yards. They over doubled the amount that the Jaguars had given up in the first 3 games of the year. And they did it again with 2 offensive linemen that are not starters. Jordan Mailata was injured on the pick 6. His backup, Andre Dillard, is still on IR. He should be activated soon. And so Jack Driscoll, who has never played the left side of the line for the Eagles, had to make the switch. So the Eagles were on a 3rd-string left tackle. And then Isaac Seumalo gets hurt, and Asua Opeta comes in as the backup right guard. And you just didn't see a big drop-off. I mean, the Eagles were running a very collegey offense, a lot of RPO glances, zone read, empty, quick flat sort of things. They were chipping on Josh Allen, rushing against Jack Driscoll. But you do what you have to do. You get through a game. And the Eagles proved here that they can win a game when they have to be run heavy, which seems like a ludicrous question to ask after the way they won games last season. But you look at other top teams in the NFL, like the Buffalo Bills. They have no rushing attack outside of Josh Allen. You look at the Los Angeles Rams. They have no rushing attack whatsoever. You look at the Kansas City Chiefs, and they've really struggled with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And obviously Isaiah Pacheco had a good game, and we'll get into that. But the Chiefs, a lot of these top teams, they have a good passing attack, but they really struggle in grinded out sort of running games. And the Eagles prove that they have that element, and they can dominate a very, very good, the top run defense in the NFL if they have to. So the Eagles look good. They go to 4-0. They're the only undefeated team left in the NFL. They are first in the NFC East. The Jaguars dropped to 2-2. They are tied for the lead in the AFC South. If you're a Jaguars fan in this game, honestly, I think you just forget about this game. You played a really good team on the road, and your quarterback had a really bad day, a lot of it aided by just the weather. It made the quick passing game harder to execute. It made the ball slippery. He fumbled a few times. Maybe, Trevor Lawrence needs to learn from this and get some gloves on next time. So you try to learn from this. I don't think Jaguars fans should feel bad about this loss. They were 8 points away. They're 8 points away from beating the only undefeated team on the road in bad conditions. So I think there's positives for both teams to take away from this game. But the Eagles will now go into this week's game in primetime in Arizona against the Cardinals, looking to stretch their winning streak to 5 straight. All right, let's roll on to the rest of the league. Let's start on Thursday night with the Miami Dolphins against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, obviously, the biggest storyline in this game is the injury to Tua Tagovailoa, who was injured a week ago on Sunday. He was seen staggering on the field, obviously. He came out of the game. He went through concussion protocol and was allowed to re-enter the game. The Dolphins later said it was a back injury, which never made sense. A back injury doesn't make you stagger around like that. Well, he takes another hit. He gets injured. This one looked really bad, and he was pulled from the game under the concussion protocol. He was taken to a hospital. This sparked an NFLPA investigation into the concussion protocol, and the independent neurological consultant who evaluated Tua on the Sunday game, his relationship has been terminated. He's no longer allowed to do that. There's plenty of responsibility to go around here, and I don't want to get into all of it. The Miami Dolphins should have never allowed Tua back into the game. It was clear and obvious that something was wrong on Sunday. He should have never played on a Thursday night game following that. The NFL is to blame as much as they want to talk about the safety of the players. Thursday night games, those don't help the safety of the players, and players speak out about that all the time. The NFL needs to get games off of Thursday night or arrange it where your Thursday night game is when you come off of a bye. They've got to figure something out here. This is a situation that never should have happened, and it overshadows, rightfully so, what should have been a really good, a highly anticipated game. So as much as there is that we can talk about from this game, nothing can be bigger. Nothing matters more than the injury to Tua, what it means for his future aside from football, and what it means for the concussion protocol that the league obviously has to review. But we'll talk about the game. We do want to get into the game. The Bengals win this one 27-15, despite being outgained by Miami. So Miami had a better offense in this game, but Cincinnati wins largely on the back of 2 big interceptions from Von Bell. Cincinnati defense is really good this year. They're allowing the second fewest touchdowns per drive, and so they're really carrying an offense that is struggling. Joe Burrow goes 20 of 31 for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns. He only took 1 sack. So after taking so many sacks the first 2 weeks, I think it was 11, he's only taken 3 sacks the last 2 weeks combined. The Bengals are another team that has no rushing attack. Joe Mixon goes 24 for 61. Jamar Chase has struggled to get going this year, only having 81 yards, but T. Higgins was the big beneficiary with 7 catches for 124 yards and a touchdown. On the Dolphins side, after the Tua injury, Teddy Bridgewater came in. He goes 14 of 23, 193 yards, 1 touchdown, and of course, a big interception. The Dolphins were also unable to run the ball, but good news for the Dolphins moving forward is Bridgewater did show a decent connection with Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill ended the day with 160 receiving yards. The biggest football question for Miami, because obviously the biggest question is around Tua, but the biggest football question for Miami is, can they survive with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback? Their upcoming games, and we have no idea what Tua's outlook is, whether he'll be back in a few weeks, whether he'll be out for the year. We just don't know. But they go to the New York Jets, at home against the Vikings, at home against the Steelers, to Detroit, to Chicago, versus Cleveland, and then they have their bye. That is not a terrible schedule. Even with Bridgewater at quarterback, every one of those games should be winnable. The Dolphins probably won't be favored against the Vikings, maybe not favored against Detroit, depending on how the other games go, if Bridgewater is the quarterback. But if they can just, you look at what Dallas has done with Cooper Rush, and you certainly don't expect to go undefeated with a backup. But if the Dolphins can just tread water, split games, go 500, and buy some time for hopefully Tua to come back fully healthy. They're 3-1 right now. They're in a good place. It's going to hurt them in the race for the AFC East, obviously against the Bills. But the Dolphins could still, I would expect them to make the playoffs still. They can stay afloat in a chase for the division. They've just got to survive until Tua is able to get back. Okay, let's move on to London. The Monday morning game was the Minnesota Vikings against the New Orleans Saints in London. Minnesota wins this game 28-25. Kirk Cousins goes 25 of 38 for 273 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Andy Dalton, starting in place of the injured Jameis Winston, goes 20 of 28 for 236 and a touchdown. Somebody has to win the NFC North, but neither the Packers nor the Vikings look threatening. I mean, the Vikings, we'll get to the Packers later, but the Vikings playing the Saints without Jameis Winston, without Michael Thomas, without Alvin Kamara, and to be honest, they should have lost this game. Fortunately for the Eagles' draft's sake, they benefit from another double doink as a 61-yard field goal attempt from Will Lutz goes off the upright and then off of the crossbar that would have sent it into overtime. And Lutz is capable of making that kick. He hit from 60 earlier in the game, but he just couldn't hit from 61 yards. And so close to getting into overtime. The Vikings unable to really put away the Saints, but they are beneficiaries of another double doink. Justin Jefferson, feast or famine continues. He was red hot in week 1, goes off. He's leading the league in receiving, and then he was stymied in weeks 2 and 3 by Darius Slay and Jeffrey Okudah. Well, in week 4, he got the best of Marshawn Lattimore. He has 10 receptions for 147 yards. Not all of them were against Lattimore, but a lot of them were. And so he continues to be very feast or famine. He's got the third most 100-yard games in the first 3 seasons in NFL history, but the consistency thus far this season just hasn't been there. Kirk Cousins has got to be able to find Adam Thielen. Dalvin Cook has to get going. There's got to be something for when Justin Jefferson is schemed out of games by opposing teams. The Vikings have to have somewhere to go, and they just don't. But like I said, Justin Jefferson has the third most 100-yard games in NFL history in his first 3 seasons. At 17, he trails both Randy Moss and Odell Beckham Jr., who each have 19. So he would need 300-yard games in the final 13 games to break that record. So we can keep an eye on that as the season goes along. Let's move on to the Cleveland Browns traveling to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. The Browns fall 20-23. Jacoby Brissett goes 21 of 35 for 234 yards with an interception. Marcus Mariota, 7 of 19 for 139 yards and 1 interception. Nick Chubb rushes for 118 yards. Kareem Hunt added another 49. After a Marcus Mariota interception, Atlanta ran the ball on 14 straight plays in this game. I mean, Atlanta beat the Browns at their own game, and they did it without Cordarrelle Patterson, who left the game with an injury. They did it with Caleb Huntley and Tyler Algier. Each had 10 carries. They combined for over 120 yards. So it'll be interesting to watch the Falcons' offense moving forward, their rushing attack. Who's going to get more carries, Huntley or Algier? Is it going to be by committee? I don't know. I think ultimately for the Browns, it's time to hand the ball over to Desmond Ridder. Mariota's not adding anything to this team. He's completing under 60% of his passes this year. He's got 4 interceptions. He's got, I believe it's 6 fumbles. He's rushed for under 100 yards, so he doesn't even add to the rushing game. Desmond Ridder can run this run-heavy play-action offense. And I bet he can probably manage to find Kyle Pitts and Drake London in the passing game. And Kyle Pitts, 1 reception for 25 yards, Drake London, 2 for 17. It's clear that Arthur Smith does not trust Marcus Mariota. I don't understand why you wouldn't just hand the ball off to Desmond Ridder. He was considered a fairly pro-ready quarterback. he can't give you less than Mariota. I would love to see them make that switch. I really think the Falcons could push to be an NFC wildcard team. But, you could argue they should be 3-1 or even 4-0. But Marcus Mariota is not getting it done. He's cost them games. It's time to see Desmond Ridder out there. As for the Browns, they just left too many points on the field. And you can't afford to do that with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. And that's not a shot at Brissett. He's a backup quarterback, and he's done a fine job. But you can't afford to leave points on the field. You can't be in goal-to-go situations and be settling for field goals. The Browns had one of the easiest opening schedules in the league with Carolina, New York Jets, Pittsburgh, and Atlanta, and they're only 2-2. They blew a game that they should have won against the Jets. There's no way they should have lost that game. They should be 3-1, and they needed to honestly probably be 4-0. Now their schedule picks up. In the games remaining before they get Deshaun Watson, they have the Chargers, the Patriots, the Ravens, the Bengals, the Dolphins, the Bills, and Tampa Bay. And so the Browns are coming up on a murderer's row. And honestly, from where I sit, I would love for the Browns to be irrelevant by the time Deshaun Watson comes back. So I'm pulling against them. I hope the schedule shakes out very negatively for them. But we'll keep an eye on it as we go. Up next, we have the Buffalo Bills against the Baltimore Ravens. The Bills win this game 23-20. The Ravens came out hot, scoring on their first 4 possessions of the game. 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals, and they would never score again. The Bills had a 76-yard touchdown drive to close the gap to 20-10 at halftime, and then they continued their comeback with 13 unanswered points in the second half. A big talking point of this game was the 4th down decision for John Harbaugh and the Ravens. Let me set the stage for you. If you didn't catch this game, there was a little over 4 minutes left. It's 4th and goal from the 2-yard line. And the Ravens, with the game tied, decided to go for it instead of kicking the extra point. I've seen John Harbaugh raked over the coals for this decision. Again, I liked the call to go for it. The defense was not playing well. They had allowed Josh Allen and the Bills to score on 2 of 3 possessions in the second half. If you get a field goal, the Bills drove right down and got a field goal. So at worst, you're going to overtime. But more than likely, the Bills aren't settling for a field goal. We've seen time and time again Josh Allen engineer these drives. You can't feel comfortable with a field goal. When you're struggling in the second half and you get a chance to put the game away, I think you do it and you go for it. And that's what they did. And it didn't pan out, but I think it was the right decision. For the Baltimore offense, J.K. Dobbins was back fully. He played a little bit last week, but he was back fully this week. And I thought he provided a boost. His numbers don't look fantastic. 13 carries for 41 yards, but he did have a touchdown. He also had 4 receptions for 22 yards and a touchdown. So 2 touchdowns. He gives a boost to a Ravens offense that desperately needs it. Right now, the Ravens offense is whatever Lamar Jackson makes it. And Lamar Jackson is continually trying to put this offense on his back. And they're coming up short. The Ravens are 2-2 right now. They've blown big leads in both of their losses. Meanwhile, for the Bills, Josh Allen had never led a 17-point comeback in his career. He was 0-7 in his career when trailing by 17. He is the first quarterback to do it since Ryan Fitzpatrick did it in 2011. And Fitzpatrick not only did it, but he did it in back-to-back weeks 2 and 3 of the 2011 season. So maybe Josh Allen will sandbag a little bit at the start of next week's game and see if he can tie Fitzmagic's record. Moving on, another NFC East game. The Washington Commanders travel to Dallas and they fall to the Dallas Cowboys 10-25. Cooper Rush now 4-0 as an Eagle or as a starting quarterback for the Cowboys, which is just kind of crazy. Carson Wentz had his second straight bad game for the Commanders. He goes 25 of 42, 170 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions while taking 2 sacks. Meanwhile, I mentioned it. Cooper Rush, he just wins. 15-27, 223 yards, and 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb had a big game in this one. He had 6 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown on 8 targets. Michael Gallup also returned to the lineup, and he didn't have a big day. 2 receptions for 24 yards and a touchdown. He was clearly on a snap count, but it's good to see him back on the field and looking like himself. Meanwhile, honestly, the story for the Cowboys is their defense. Last year, the Cowboys defense gave up a lot of yards, but they got a lot of turnovers. This year, the Cowboys defense has been consistently better. They haven't allowed 20-plus points in any of their first 4 games. They've only allowed 1 touchdown per game through the first 4 games. The Cowboys have done exactly what they needed to do when Dak went down. When your starting quarterback goes down for a short period of time, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you would love to be like 500. The Cowboys are sitting here 3-0 with their backup quarterback. They have bought time for Dak Prescott to recover and to come back. And we know he needs 1 more week. He's been ruled out for the Rams game. Even if they lose that game, you go 3-1, and then you get a game with a division rival in the Eagles, the team that's leading the division, with Dak coming back. That's tremendous stabilizing presence for the team. So shout out to the Cowboys doing what they needed to do, taking care of business with Dak Prescott out. They're going to try to do it for 1 more week next week against the Rams. Now let's move on to one of the crazier games of the week. It was the Seattle Seahawks against the Detroit Lions. The Seahawks win this game 48-45. Let Geno Smith cook. Geno is playing out of his mind. He has a 77% completion percentage in this game, 23 of 30 passing for 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 49 yards. This is the first time in Geno's career he has gone back-to-back games with 300-plus passing yards. And he's doing it in an offense that, if we can just be honest, looked better last year with Geno Smith than it did with Russell Wilson. His offense certainly looks better this year than Russell Wilson's offense in Denver, which was supposed to be a playoff contender. Geno Smith has gotten a chance to start in Seattle, and he's looked very good. I'm not saying Seattle is going to commit to Geno Smith and make him the quarterback of the future, but it's been a nice storyline for Geno, who was largely written off after the start of his career with the Jets, and he's playing really well. He leads the league in completion percentage over expectation at plus 10%, and that's almost double second place on the list. So shout out to Geno Smith, playing really well. Rashad Penny also has a huge game here. He goes off for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. Seattle's offense did not punt in this game. And now through 4 games, the Detroit Lions defense has allowed the most points in NFL history through 4 games. Seattle's defense is also atrocious. They surrender 45 points to a Lions offense, missing DeAndre Swift. It's missing Amon-Ra St. Brown and DJ Shark, but Williams goes for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. TJ Hawkinson almost has 200 yards receiving. This game was scoregami. There's never been an NFL game before that has ended with a score of 48-45, but there has been now. And the fun fact for the day, Jared Goff has been a starting quarterback in 3 of the 4 games in the past 5 years that have had 90-plus points scored. So you want shootouts, I guess, maybe you need to get Jared Goff under center, another guy who has played better than expected this year in the Lions offense. Moving on, we have the Chargers at the Houston Texans. The Chargers win this game 34-24. Justin Herbert goes 27 of 39 for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. Davis Mills, 26 of 35, 246 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 4 sacks. The Chargers' offensive line in this game actually looked pretty good, especially considering 6th-round rookie Jamari Salyer was playing left tackle. Obviously, Rashawn Slater hurt, potentially season-ending biceps injury. They're acting like he might be able to come back near the end of the year, which would obviously be huge news for the Chargers. Herbert was only sacked once in this game. He was only hit twice, and protecting Herbert is of the utmost importance as he nurses that rib injury. That said, the Chargers are letting games get away from them down the stretch. They were up 17-7 on the Chiefs in week 2, and they ended up losing that game by 3. They were up 24-10 week 1 on the Raiders, and the Raiders came back. Now, the Chargers would hang on to win, but it was closer than it ever needed to be. They were up 27-7 in this one, and they let the Texans back into this game and make it interesting. The Chargers have got to figure out a way to put away games. You can't keep relying on fourth quarters to win tight games that never should have been tight to begin with. And so that's something to monitor. As the Chargers, they're just going to try to stay relevant for the playoffs and hopefully get Joey Bosa back, hopefully get Rashawn Slater, J.C. Jackson, Keenan Allen, all these guys that are injured. Hopefully they can maintain footing in a playoff race long enough for those guys to get back. For the Texans, there's not much, honestly, to look at. The Texans are without a win still. They're 0-3-1, which is honestly for the best. I'm willing to say Davis Mills is not the future of the Texans organization, and them having the number one pick to take their pick of quarterbacks in this draft is probably the best outcome. But you do focus on the younger players. Dameon Pierce, 14 carries, 131 yards, and a touchdown. He also had 6 receptions in this game. Now, they only went for 8 yards, but they were targeting him in the passing game. Hopefully they can get him rolling. He's a guy that I was high on coming out in the draft, and so hopefully he can be a piece for this offense down the road. Moving on, we have the Titans traveling to Indianapolis in an AFC South showdown, and the Titans win 24-17. The Colts drop to 1-2-1. They follow up their impressive win over the Chiefs with a clunker over the Titans. This game for me is all about the running backs. It's Derrick Henry versus Jonathan Taylor, the last 2 Triple Crown winners for rushing in the NFL. It's the first time those 2 guys have faced off since like the 1950s, and Derrick Henry definitely got the better of this matchup. He had 22 carries for 114 yards and a touchdown. He looked like his old self. He looked more explosive. He looked like the guy that the Titans could build a rushing attack around. Meanwhile, Jonathan Taylor had one of the worst games of his career. He had 20 carries for 42 yards, and he lost a fumble. Frustration continues to mount in Indianapolis as they're just unable to win football games. Matt Ryan, I think, is a huge cause. The offensive line is a cause. The receivers are a cause. But Matt Ryan had 2 more fumbles in this game. He had an interception. Those turnovers put the Colts in a hole that they were just not able to climb out of. Matt Ryan now has 9 fumbles through 4 games. He's on pace for 38 fumbles this season, which would shatter the NFL record of 23 set by Kerry Collins and Dante Culpepper. So the receivers are unable to get open, create separation. The offensive line, Matt Pryor at left tackle, is going terribly. And then you add into that mix a quarterback who can't move and has ball security issues. And it's just a major problem. Fortunately, the thing that has plagued the Colts for years, ever since Andrew Luck retired, is building a roster that had everything but a quarterback. And you can only take that approach so far. Fortunately for Chris Ballard and Frank Reich, if they survive this season, the Colts, I think, are finally going to solve their quarterback issues, their franchise quarterback issues, because I think the Colts are going to have a top 5 pick. If Harrison Butker was not injured for the Chiefs, the Colts would also be winless. They couldn't even beat the Texans. I think the Colts are destined for a top 5 pick and a quarterback in this year's draft. And if you're a Colts fan, it's been a disappointing season. Honestly, I think it's about time to orient your focus to the draft. You could win a few games. You're not going to make the playoffs more than likely. And if you do, you're not going to go anywhere with Matt Ryan. It's time to go all in to get a quarterback. And so for the Colts, that's what I'm rooting for the rest of this season. Let's move on to the Chicago Bears traveling to New York to play the Giants, and they lose this game 20-12. The biggest storyline for this game, I think, is Saquon Barkley. He rushed for 146 yards on 31 carries, and he opened up the running game for Daniel Jones, who had 68 rushing yards on 6 carries, and he had 2 touchdowns. Now, they only passed for 82 yards in this game, and it was on the back of this rushing attack. We got into an interesting scenario late in this game where Daniel Jones left the game with an ankle injury. Then Tyrod Taylor gets a concussion in the 4th quarter. And so Saquon Barkley became the quarterback in the Wildcat, and he outdueled Justin Fields in a battle of quarterbacks that were not allowed to throw the football. The Bears, I don't know what to say about the Bears at this point. Justin Fields completes 50% of his passes for 174 yards. He takes 6 sacks. The Bears can't stop the run. They're a bad football team. And I don't know what the Bears are going to do. Justin Fields doesn't look like the guy. Justin Fields has also been put in a terrible situation. I like that at least they let him throw the ball a little more this game. They've got to figure out by the end of the season, are you going to try to build around Justin Fields? You will have wasted 2 years of his rookie window. Are you going to try to build around him, or are you going to move on? And the only way to do that is to let him run a passing offense. And I know the offensive line's not good. I know the receivers are bad. This is a situation you put yourself in. Let's see if we can evaluate him. He did have some good connections with Darnell Mooney, and so hopefully they can build off that. I'm still holding out hope for Justin Fields, but it is getting dimmer as the weeks go by. Now the Bears, again, they just can't get out of their own way. Like, Justin Fields would have had the opportunity to engineer a game-winning drive, but Velus Jones, making his rookie debut, muffs a punt at the 2-minute warning. First start of his career, he muffs the punt, and the Giants recover and are able to just run out the clock. So continual bad breaks for the Bears. They dropped 2-2, and we'll see what they are able to do down the stretch. Next, we have the Jets at the Steelers. The Jets win this game 24-20, and Zach Wilson made his return in this game after sustaining an injury in the first preseason game. He looked really bad early, and then he rallied late. He led 2 long scoring drives to erase a 10-point deficit. He ends the game 18 of 36 for 252, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions with a sack. He also had a receiving touchdown on a pass thrown by Braxton Berrios, a 2-yard receiving touchdown. So mixed results for Zach Wilson, who looked rusty early. You hope you can see more of the second half in his future performances if you're the Jets. On the other side of the field, the Steelers also made a quarterback change. They benched Mitchell Trubisky at halftime, and they went to Kenny Pickett. All I have to say is I sat on this show last week, and I said, coming off of a Thursday night game where Mitch Trubisky played bad, the Steelers lost, now is the time on the long week to go to Kenny Pickett. Instead, the Steelers trotted Trubisky out there, and they gave him the starting reps for the week in practice. They let him play a miserable first half, and then they benched him. If you are a one bad half away type of leash, how about you just make the move on the long week? Give Kenny Pickett the starting reps instead of just throwing him in at halftime. The Steelers have just mishandled this situation from the jump, and they finally put Pickett in there. He goes 10 of 13, 120 yards, 127 yards, and 3 interceptions. Now, the 3 interceptions is a little bit of a misnomer. If you go watch the tape on Pickett, I actually thought he looked pretty good. They moved him out of the pocket some, and he looked comfortable there. He had a couple instances of stepping into contact, stepping into a throw, taking a hit, and delivering a good on-target pass. If we go through his 3 interceptions, his first one, he makes an aggressive throw downfield to Chase Claypool. 6'4", Chase Claypool covered by a 5'9" defensive back. And Claypool, the ball hits his hands, and he doesn't come up with it. And it ends up getting tipped up and intercepted by a safety. I like the aggression. Mitch Trubisky is not an aggressive quarterback, and so I liked Pickett pushing that ball downfield. The second interception, he's kind of fading back in the pocket on a 2nd and long, and late he tries to throw it out to the flat. It's a tough throw. I don't like the process to make that throw because there's a defender there and there's another defender close. At best, you're gaining like 1 or 2 yards. I would rather just see him get rid of that ball personally. But he makes the throw. It's a tough throw. It came out high, but it did hit the receiver in the hands. And it goes off his hands and is intercepted. So shouldn't have been a turnover. I wouldn't have made the throw, but it wasn't his fault. And then the last one, obviously, was a Hail Mary. So I thought there were encouraging things from Pickett. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do off of, a full week of reps in practice. But again, they should have started Pickett to begin with. Now they're throwing him in as a 1-3 team, and they have Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Miami, and Philadelphia, all who have really good defenses up next. So it is a murderer's row for Kenny Pickett. Provides a spark in this game. We'll see how he looks against that murderer's row of defenses. For the Jets, the biggest thing in this game is they just continue to lose offensive linemen to injury. This game, they lost rookie right tackle Max Mitchell. They already were down Micaiah Becton, Dwayne Brown, and George Fant. They moved Elijah Vera Tucker from guard to left tackle in the middle of the game after the injury. Now, it looks like they might be able to get Dwayne Brown back this week, which would obviously be big for them. but they've just been so banged up front. But they moved to 2-2. And so we'll continue to monitor, what they're able to do, especially with Zach Wilson now back in the fold. Moving on to the afternoon slate, we have the Arizona Cardinals against the Carolina Panthers, and the Cardinals win 26-16. Carolina's offense is just awful. They have 3 turnovers in this game, 2 Baker Mayfield interceptions. They go 2 of 10 on third downs. They are now 1-26 under Matt Rule when their opponent scores over 17 points. This is just a woefully inept offense. When your quarterback is playing as bad as Baker Mayfield is playing, how does Christian McCaffrey only get 8 carries? He gets 9 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown, but how are you not handing him the ball? DJ Moore is getting frustrated in this offense. You've got Brian Burns on the defense. You've got some good players. You have talent. You just do not have a quarterback. And a lot of that is because you do not have a head coach. The most exciting thing to follow for the Panthers moving forward is if Matt Rule is going to be able to scapegoat Baker Mayfield like he did Joe Brady last year and somehow actually survive this season. I don't think he is. I think they're both gone next year, but survivors survive, and he survived last year when it was clear that he was the problem with this football team. For the Cardinals, Kyler Murray goes 23 of 32 for 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Not much going in the rushing game for them, to be honest. Marquise Brown has 6 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown. Zach Ertz has 6 receptions for 47 yards and a touchdown. The Cardinals are just a bad football team. They are poorly coached. They have no offensive structure, and they come alive in the second half when Kyler just takes over the game. Their offense, the only plan they have is Kyler bail out our lack of an offensive plan. That's largely why you've seen them. They are the worst team in the NFL in first halves this year. They average 4 points per game, dead last in the NFL. In the second half, Kyler starts to do his thing, and they have the number 2 scoring offense in the second half this year at around 16.5 points. This is a team that starts slow because their head coach is inept, and eventually Kyler sort of pulls things out. And they're 2-2 playing that way. They're still in the playoff race. But this is a bad football team, and they're going to have to figure something out. They get DeAndre Hopkins back in a couple of weeks. Maybe that will help. Honestly, what they really need is a different play caller as well. It's time for Cliff Kingsbury to go. Moving on from one set of bad offenses to another, let's talk about the New England Patriots and the Green Bay Packers. The Packers win this game in overtime, 27-24. Aaron Rodgers was 4 of 11 for 44 yards and 1 touchdown, albeit a touchdown thrown to a Patriots defender in the first half. He rebounded in the second half, and he is able to lead the Packers to a win. They're now 3-1. They've won 3 in a row, but it's hard to feel good about this team. They have major problems. They doubled down on defense by trading Davante Adams, and they said, we can figure out the offense with Rodgers. And they doubled up on defense in the draft with the picks they got for Davante Adams. Well, Devontae Wyatt isn't even playing football right now, the first-round defensive tackle that they drafted. Quay Walker hasn't been great. They created offensive problems to try to have an elite defense, and their defense isn't even good. They're 17th in DVOA. The offense is in disarray. Rodgers has thrown 38% of his passes behind the line of scrimmage. That leads the league. Number 2 is the guy we just talked about, Baker Mayfield, at 31%. You don't want to be mentioned in the same breath as Baker Mayfield when it comes to stats. The Packers' offense is in disarray right now. Fortunately, they have the Giants, the Jets, and Washington up next. So they've got a soft schedule here. They better figure it out, because looming after that in week 8 is a date with the Buffalo Bills. And, there's no reason that they shouldn't be 6-1 going into that game, but they've got to figure out something fast, or they're going to fade away, not from the playoffs. The NFC's too weak for that, but they're going to lose any shot they have at a 1 seed or to be a serious contender. On the Patriots side of the ball, Bailey Zappi came into this game. Mac Jones has the injury to the ankle. He was out. Bryant Hoyer gets injured in the first half, and Bailey Zappi enters the game, and he goes 10 of 15 for 99 yards and a touchdown. Bailey Zappi became the first rookie quarterback to throw a touchdown pass. I don't know if you had that on your bingo card for 2022, but I certainly did not. The Pats had an opportunity to win this game. They got the ball with 1:52 left in regulation. and they just went super conservative. They had it again in overtime, but they went really conservative. They punted the ball. They gave the Packers a chance to win, which they took. And I just don't understand. With a third-string quarterback in a game that you should have been blown out in, stay aggressive. Go for the win. They probably don't have a great selection of plays that they've worked with their third-string rookie quarterback, but do something. Don't just punt the ball. Don't just run the ball. Go try to actually win the football game. And so the Patriots drop to 1-3, while the Packers move on to 3-0. Up next, we have the Denver Broncos traveling to Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. This was the Josh Jacobs game, as the Raiders ride Josh Jacobs to a 32-23 win. Jacobs had 28 carries for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also added 31 yards receiving in this one. His rushing yards was a career high. This is the third time in his career he's gone over 100 yards on the Broncos, so he just loves to play against the Broncos. On the Broncos side, Javonte Williams left the game with a knee injury. It was later confirmed to be a significant knee injury. I think it was an ACL, and he is done for the year. Melvin Gordon came in, and he promptly fumbled, and so he was benched. And so the rushing attack for the Broncos is in disarray. On the Raiders side, Devontae Adams, this was a big Devontae Adams game. He had 13 targets, 9 catches for 101 yards. So, we continue to go back and forth on Devontae Adams, over-targeting versus under-targeting him. They haven't quite found that balance yet. The Broncos offense looked like they had it figured out in the first half. They put up 16 points in the first half, but then they only picked up 3 first downs in the entire second half. Josh McDaniels gets his first head coaching win for the Raiders against the team that had to fire him as a head coach several years ago. So some fun irony in that. Max Crosby had a big game for the Raiders here, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and a batted pass. So the Raiders have a huge game. They get their first win. They get that monkey off their back. They're 1-3. They have a huge game coming up against the Chiefs before the bye. If they lose, which would be the expectation, they go into the bye at 1-4, feeling bad about the start of this year. But a win puts you at 2-3, puts you with a victory over the Broncos, a victory over the Chiefs. Of course, you've lost in the division to the Chargers, but the Chargers are banged up. It would put you right there in contention with some tiebreakers. So they would be right back in a loaded AFC West, despite an awful start, if they can find a way to handle the Chiefs. So speaking of the Chiefs, let's go on to Sunday Night Football. I don't know if anybody can handle the Chiefs. The Chiefs beat the Buccaneers 41-31. When you fumble the opening kickoff like the Buccaneers did, it's going to be a long day. The biggest thing I take away from this game is you don't want to play the Chiefs after they lose. Drop a game to the Colts, okay? Drop 41 points on a defense that was only allowing 9 points per game. This is the most points that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have allowed since 2019, when they brought Todd Bowles on board to call defensive plays. And there were turbulent circumstances for the Bucs. There was the hurricane, having to deal with the fallout from that. Despite all that, I thought the offense performed pretty admirably. They get Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Julio Jones back. And you see, Tom Brady drops back 52 times, throws for 385 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Evans has 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. Godwin had 59 yards. Do you think Tom Brady missed those guys? The Bucs' run game hasn't been working, and now that they have receiving weapons back, they just abandon it. They had 6 rushes for 3 yards, and they dropped Brady back 52 times. Patrick Mahomes just continues to be Patrick Mahomes. The clip, if you haven't seen it, go look up his touchdown pass on the sprint rollout where he spins and then jump shots the ball to the back of the end zone. I put it on my Twitter timeline, but you can find it anywhere. It was just a ridiculous play that only Patrick Mahomes could make. Mahomes has now become the fastest quarterback to throw for 20,000 yards in his career, doing it in only 67 games. Previously, Matthew Stafford held that record at 71 games. And so the Chiefs roll after losing a game they shouldn't have lost to the Colts. They stabilize at 3-1. And like we just mentioned, they have a big game against the Raiders coming up in Week 5. Now let's roll on to the final game, the Monday Night Football game. The Los Angeles Rams travel to San Francisco, and they get blasted by the 49ers, 9-24. The 49ers sacked Matthew Stafford 7 times. They limited them to 257 total yards of offense with 0 touchdowns. Stafford has only had 2 games in his Rams career without a touchdown pass. And it was this week against the 49ers and last week. And so the Rams are hitting a horrible drought, and just nothing is working for them. They have no running game, 18 carries for 57 yards. Allen Robinson is just a ghost. He had 6 targets in this game, and he had 7 yards. Cooper Kupp is the only thing working for this offense. And when you only have one thing that works for your offense, opposing defenses can take that down. Not making a first-round draft pick since 2016 is finally catching up with the Rams. There is just, it sounds crazy to say, there's just not enough talent on this team. They've taken the stars and scrubs approach as far as it can go, and I think we're on the downhill slide of this. So the Rams, they obviously still going to be a contender for the playoffs because the NFC is not great and 7 teams have to make it. But there's serious concerns about the Rams after their first 4 games of the season. For the 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo, not a great quarterback. 16 to 27, 239 yards and a touchdown, but they're able to win the game on the back of a back-breaking defense and Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel really padded the stats for Stafford. Here he has 6 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown, including a 57-yard touchdown that was mostly yards after the catch, and it really padded Jimmy G's stats. He is integral to this offense, both for his manufactured touch ability, both at wide receiver and at running back, and just his yak ability. Jimmy G is not going to be a dynamic quarterback, and so you need that dynamic playmaker. A late pick 6 in this game is what sealed it. Stafford was driving down the field, a late pick 6, and it was a pass intended for, you guessed it, Cooper Kupp. The only guy that Stafford will throw the ball to. The Rams step through it, run it back for a touchdown. The Rams have now lost 7 straight regular season games to the 49ers. So the Rams defense has just been phenomenal this year. They've allowed 11.5 points per game through the first 4 weeks. And so the Rams, the 49ers, it's going to be an interesting division to see play out. Maybe the Seahawks can get involved if their defense can get better, if Geno Smith can sustain his level of play. It's certainly going to be an interesting division to watch shake out, a division that I didn't think would be that competitive with the Rams coming off the Super Bowl, but they've really taken a big step backwards through the first 4 weeks. Well, that's going to do it for episode number 74 of Chalk Talk. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, make sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the podcast out. You can give me a follow on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. Make sure you check out the all 22 videos I put out yesterday. I'm going to be putting out later today. They're all on my YouTube channel, so be sure you're subscribed there as well. And again, you can also catch me on the Bleeding Green Nation feed for post-game reaction shows and then an additional show that's going to be launching next week. So be sure you check all of that stuff out. If you've got any feedback on the show, any questions you want to get off, send me a DM. My DMs are always open. So from me, from the Painted Lines, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next week.